Mhm. Hello, all of you, artisans, co-creators, wonderful people who look out for the environment, our creative provenance. Thank you for listening to me. I'm very humbled to be part of Agati Foundation keynote speech. This is the second time I'm doing it, and I feel extremely privileged to be able to address you. And a little shout out to Saloni, my sister, for facilitating this, being the founder of this exemplary initiative. Today, my topic is craftivism, the humanity of creativity. Now, craftivism comes from craft and activism. I thought it was an important topic to discuss because last year, if you remember, it was about craft and kranti. Kranti being the Sanskrit word for revolution. So swa kranti, which means my personal, my inner revolution led by craft. And so I thought, what do we do to take this another step forward? And craftivism, which is required so much in today's world where we are inundated with sort of the senseless overproduction, fast fashion that is creating havoc with not only the people, but also with our beautiful planet. So I did not, craftivism is not a word, sadly, that I have invented. This word, which is a form of activism, which incorporates the ideals of anti-consumerism, anti-capitalism, supports environmentalism, compassionate consumption. All this was actually coined by a wonderful author, and her name is Betsy Greer. She talked about bringing together a world of craft and activism. And in her words, she says, craftivism is a way of looking at life while voicing opinion through creativity. When you do that, it makes your voice stronger, your compassion deeper, your quest for justice more infinite. Today, it's a worldwide movement, and I think we need to be part of it in order for us to be better elevated selves and to understand the value of the higher good. Now, when I say higher good, that brings us to humanity. Higher good implies a sense of ethics and, by extension, a need to weave altruism in the creative space. Now, why is activism and altruism so important in craft? First of all, as we all know, as you artisans of the world know, co-creators of the world know, the importance of craft is always because it's grassroots. You know, one of my teachers, she doesn't know me, but she is my environmental guru, and you all must already know her, Bandana Shiva. You know, she talks about creating living systems that evolve through self-organization, which means that everything is ground up. You know, in this corporatized world we live in, we've been told it's a pyramid structure where the 1% at the top rule the rest. And here we are saying the opposite. We are grassroots. Craft is grassroots, and it goes from the ground to the skies above. And in fact, Vandana Shiva herself says, you know, a tree doesn't grow from the leaves, they grow from the roots. So therefore, craft is incredibly important in understanding how are we connected to the world that we live in, to the physical environment that we live in. Are we grounded? Are we creatures of this earth, of Mother Earth? So I think that is a fundamental truth about craft that I love. There's seldom that we find craft emerging out of a factory. They may replicate it in a factory, but craft has provenance, heritage, ancestors. It talks about trees. And, you know, I was in Ladakh doing a story on the Pashmina, you know, the wool of the Pashmina goats that are high up, 18,000 feet above sea level. And the nomads take them higher and higher because when they start taking the hair from here, the goat's hair, that fall naturally, they're not killed, They're singing these beautiful songs about thank you for giving us the pashmina, thank you for eating the grass on our grounds. It is magical. So that interconnectivity, only craft and made by hand, when you can dig your feet into the soil, when you can dirty your hands, it comes from that. I think, we don't have to look further. I'm from India. I'm Nepali by provenance, but I grew up in India, and I'm so grateful because we grew up with incredible philosophies that came from Buddhism and Hinduism, and even before that, Vedanta, the Vedic studies, and of course, the Christianity and Judaism and Islam. Such beautiful philosophies surrounded us. And I keep going back to understanding where we can learn about craft, creativity, humanity, compassion from old wisdom, because they already exist. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. We need to revisit and reevaluate how do we want to bring these wonderful philosophies into our lives so that we become compassionate consumers and creators. So we don't have to look far, because we had Mahatma Gandhi, who as a singular person, a single human soul, marched the length and breadth of the country in the quest for truth that encompassed political truth, social truth, economic truth, and also, while doing that, preaching about ahimsa or nonviolence, which were the foundations of Gandhian economics. So it's very important that we keep associating this, the ideas of ahimsa, to the craft ideology. That is fundamentally what differentiates beautiful handmade crafts from different cultures of the world to what is made in factories, which are made by people who've been deemed faceless and invisible. So it is imperative that we use this kind of deep wisdom. We have to revisit them, because we can't keep saying economic activity like we are machines. We are doing work, fulfilling work, because it's part of our spiritual growth. So, I love Gandhiji for making alive wonderful political, social movements that can be applied today. Swadeshi, Swadeshi. And given that you're artisans and co-creators in so many different parts of the world, Swadeshi means that you are creating from your own country. You're creating from your own culture. You're creating from your own heritage. So the beauty in this diversity is extraordinary. That should be celebrated, not homogenized, not made into one blob of nothingness. I think it's wonderful to know what is the Mexican provenance, what is the Indian provenance, what is the Nepalese, what is the Bhutanese, what is Swedish, what is, we can go on and on. That diversity is so important. If anything, the only thing that should be common is our humanity. So we need to be clear that Swadeshi is an upholding of craft cultures that have difference, which are celebrated. And so we need to revisit these wonderful Gandhian ideologies. On another note, so Swadeshi is also about dignity of work, not labor. I'm going to talk about this a little later, but the idea that human force have become labor force is because we have lost touch with the sacredness of work. And I think when we revisit old philosophies, whether it comes from Buddhism, it comes from great leaders like Dr. Martin Luther King, Gandhiji, E.F. Schumacher, who I'm going to talk a little later about, Tolstoy. It is important to remind yourselves, you who are in the forefront of the craft industry, that you're supported by the wisdom of the past. And so with Gandhiji, whatever he says or said so many years back about the mechanization of work, about the overt hyper-industrialization that takes away the dignity of labor, that makes human beings not in touch with made by hand. You don't value storytelling. You are living in a world which is about assembly line production, factory work, labor force, urbanization that kills the soul. You, the craftspeople of the world, have to hold a torch. Revisit these wonderful philosophies in your own cultures and come up with philosophies that will lead you and guide you and share it with the world, because we need your voice. And that is part of your activism. And when you do that, it means that you are allowing human beings to have this kind of trusteeship of what we do, what we create, where we live. Not in terms of boundaries, but that we are in a universe occupying this beautiful little blue dot that is the earth, and that we are all interconnected. Gandhi used the word sarvodaya, which is goodwill and happiness for all. That it is not that we are trustees of this world that we live in, that it should not be pillaged just by the capitalists and the rich. We all have ownership. Sarvodaya. I think Gandhiji always said that a country can only be developed if we can develop from the villages. So I think that is very important for craft, to understand that what we create, all these beautiful handmade, and I saw all the beautiful products that have been made because I'm part of the jury. They all have a story. It goes back in time. It talks about mothers and fathers and grandparents. It talks about your ancestry. You know, it is like your totem pole of creativity. And that has to be valued, because we have to understand there is great joy in this rural provenance of creativity. That brings in the humanity to creativity. You know, Alan Watts is an amazing philosopher whom I adore and I'm very inspired by, and he popularized the teachings, the Zen teachings, to the Western world. And in an essay titled Wealth versus Money, he explores a tendency to confuse money and wealth, not recognizing the differences of the two. If you don't recognize the difference between the two, that is wealth and money, he calls it the peculiar and perhaps the fatal fallacy of civilization. I mean, of course, no one expects to do business where there is no profit. We do deserve to make profit and live happy lives. But in the name of money, when people and craft get dismissed, then we have to talk about what's the real profit, because real profit should be about living with dignity and elegance in this beautiful environment that nature provides us, to be able to find joy in our work. So the idea that money versus wealth, work versus labor is very important. And craft is at the forefront of telling us what the difference is. And so we need to talk about it more and more, because it is the antithesis of the factory made. And we value that. And people need to understand why we value that. So when we talk about value, and I keep going back to something that I have been saying in many of my speeches, and it's very simple. Craft is the medium by which we understand the whole spectrum of creativity that gives dignity. And I always refer to the 4 Ps, right? So you have the product, you have the people, you have the process, and then you have purpose. I think this pretty much creates a beautiful circle of life where we don't dismiss any part of creativity, any part of the way we consume, so that we will always take into account all the stakeholders in this creative act, this co-creation act. So if any one of those are missing, which for most of you, as I've seen in the products that you've entered, you all literally tick off all the boxes, that there is this amazing association and camaraderie with the people that you co-create with. you have great joy in telling us about the processes that you follow, then there is great sense of joy in the product that you've created because of the people and the processes. And most of you have a sense of purpose, which is, how do I give back? Which community do I stand for? What kind of craft are you resurrecting? I think that is just divine work. And I'm so grateful that I'm part of this. And I read this wonderful line somewhere that says, what is the choice that you have? Is it, and craft can show us this way, right? Is it creative altruism versus destructive egocentrism? So think about this. This is creative altruism. You are creative and you're altruistic. That means you give back. You care about communities. You care about the environment. And then what's the opposite of that? Destructive egocentrism, which we see in the fast fashion world today, in the hyper-consumerism of the world, which celebrates something like a Black Friday as if it is the best thing that one can go to and consume within. So this brings us to humanity and creativity. There's a wonderful, renowned American Buddhist monk. His name is Bhikkhu Bodhi. Please Google, where he talks about what happens when compassion and justice are unified. You know, do we become more conscientious consumers? Are we compassionate in our creativity? And I think it is very important to revisit this, only because, it's not just about saying, I want to be a compassionate consumer or creator. It's about saying, I will have a fierce determination to uplift others in my journey of creativity and creating wealth, not only for myself, but for others. I think that's what makes a craftivism so important, that in your heart, you have to have a fierce determination to do good for not only yourself, but for others. And if I can quote from what this wonderful monk, Bhikkhu Bodhi, has said, the major threat that I see today, he says, lies in the ascendancy of a purely utilitarian worldview, driven by a ruthless economic system that rates everything in terms of monetary value and sees everything as nothing more than a source of financial profit. Thus, under this mode of thinking, the environment turns into a pool of natural resources to be extracted and turned into profit. And this hurts me personally. I read somewhere else that, the story of humanity is a story of excavation. We have excavated the earth over and over again. We've pillaged the earth, the natural resources that Bhikkhu speaks about, as if we are the only ones, we are the only species that are here, and that other sentient beings don't matter. And I find that hurtful, this whole line about us human beings excavating. It's a violent act on nature. And we don't want any kind of creativity that hurts the environment in this way. So when products become bigger than people, process, and the environment that we are living within, is that product important? Is it worth having? In my very, very humble opinion, I don't think so. So I think it's important that we start having this sort of a conversation within ourselves as creators, as consumers, this inner conversion that we differentiate between desire and greed. And this greed that leads to pilfering and sabotaging the people and the planet that we live in. In fact, there's a wonderful way he explains it. He says the birds of change need wings to rise up and fly. One wing is like a moral compass, and the other wing is a commitment to action. This moral awareness and the empowerment that comes from action, I think that is what leads to compassionate, kind, creativity, and craft can show us that humanity. And, this kind of humanity, like, we have to keep in mind the practicality of this kind of humanity comes from recognizing that you're not the only one in this creative spectrum. And because craftspeople are so much entrenched in the culture, I am going to take the 3 C's, which are propagated by Cultural Intellectual Property Rights Initiative that's been founded by my dear friend, Monica Mohsin. And she made it very clear and I repeat this again and again in all my talks. I'm going to do this again. So please bear with me. She talks about the 3 Ps. If you're going into a culture to create, then you have to have consent, you have to give credit, and you have to give compensation. If these 3 C's are not met, then it's an unequal environment. It is a power haggling creative environment that does disservice and creates an imbalance. Please go check out their website, and always keep in mind for anyone, because I know that I'm talking to an audience who come from different cultures, who want those cultures to be respected by people who buy the. We've seen enough cultural appropriation take place. So just follow these 3 C's: consent, credit, compensation. And I think this is something that we have to ask ourselves frequently. And Gandhi himself said, if you don't ask these real questions to ourselves every day, hold ourselves responsible and accountable, then there's a beautiful quote. He says, when the real enemy is within, why fight an external war? So change has to come from within. I mean, no one has shown better than Mahatma Gandhi that the power of individual will is all-surpassing, that we should not undermine what all the wonderful work that individually all the craftspeople are doing all over the world, but also to honor the kind of community that they work within, that nothing is in isolation. And so this is the grassroots humanity of craft that I absolutely admire, and I'm grateful for that. So this brings me to, we talk about humanity, that brings us to morality, and so it brings, by progression of thought, to ethical leadership. I've grown up in India, I'm Nepali, so as I told you, like, to be growing up with all kinds of philosophies was a very natural part of my coming into my own. And words like karma and dharma, as you must be so familiar with too, have been very much part of my ideology, in fact, my everyday life. And I love using the ideals of karma and dharma when it comes to ethical leadership, because we do talk about free will. We have free will. And your dharma is that free will to choose one path or the other path, right? Your dharma decides whether you want to go left or you want to go right, because your dharma is your moral fulcrum, your own inner ethical leader who's going to tell you which side are you going to go to. So you have free will. But after you choose, then it's cause and effect. Then karma is then bestowed on you depending on the choices that you make. So ethical leadership is about having a moral fulcrum to choose the right path. And karma then, because of cause and effect, you've got a blossoming karmic destiny. I love talking about this when I talk about creativity, work, because this interconnectedness between philosophy, sustainability, creativity, spirituality is what I truly believe is going to change the way we look at our world. We cannot be so distant and so dislocated from our groundedness. It is this lack of groundedness that is creating such havoc in the world. And which other industry can teach us more about groundedness than craft, than the artisans who are scattered all over the world in the most amazing, amazing cultures of the world? And then add to that, what happens when we believe in a world of craft and humanity? Then we enter the world of eco-spirituality. Eco-spirituality is based on the fundamental belief in the sacredness of Mother Earth. And whatever your god or goddesses, it doesn't matter. You can say the divine spirit, you can say, the quantum energy, you can say Brahma. It doesn't matter in which way you express this kind of divine energy that governs us, that keeps this beautiful earth alive, nourished and nurtured. It all comes, we need to acknowledge this idea of eco-spirituality. That, the three fundamental entities, the individual, the world, the creator, that we are all entwined, that we're inseparable, that we are aligned with each other, even though we're independent in our creativity. There's a beautiful, beautiful, I think I've said this in my last speech in the same forum, but Thich Nhat Hanh, the incredible Vietnamese monk who was, recommended by Dr. Martin Luther King for the Nobel Peace Prize, he has a beautiful analogy. He just takes, let me show you. He just says, everyone take a white piece of paper and stare into it. He says, if you're poetic, you're going to see clouds rolling on that piece of white sheet. And, you see the clouds, and then you see the rain falling. If the clouds weren't there, the rain wouldn't be falling. If the rain didn't fall on the forest, there would be no wood. If there was no wood, there would be no human being, no lumberjack who's going to cut the tree and turn it into the paper that you look at and write your ideas and think of creative world around you. So he said the entire cosmic story is in this one piece of white paper. That is eco-spirituality. That is the kind of interconnectedness which I think it gives me goosebumps every time I talk about it. Just to talk a little bit about this kind of eco-spirituality, I'm literally a student of sustainability and spirituality. So whatever I'm telling you is what I'm learning. And I'm not like the wonderful activists who've been doing phenomenal work for 30 years, 40 years. I am a student. So I hope if I transgress anything or if I've made some mistakes in the way I interpret philosophies, you must forgive me. So I think I've again talked about this, but I have to say it again. The beautiful book that everyone should read, Small is Beautiful, because craft is led by small communities of people who collaborate, who do specific projects that align themselves to what's happening in the environment with the people there. So E.F. Schumacher, the German economist, wrote this wonderful book, Small is Beautiful, Economics as if People Matter. As if people matter, like it's wonderful, right? Not just profit, not just the financial steam or the size of a corporation. Economics as if people matter. I think that is so profound. And in that, there's a seminal essay called Buddhist Economy. And for me, that chapter is all about the ethics of economy, environmental awareness, and how we can bring this cohesive experience of humanity into leadership, into our jobs. So I'm not going to say too much about it, but I think you as artisans of the world, again, you have to be a beacon because you are small-scale creative collectives, and you have to be the torchbearer to stand up against the system and strive to bring people, product, process, purpose in a seamless model of humane creativity. We cannot just say us and them. We need to now rise and make ourselves heard. For a fulfilling business of co-creation, it has to live beyond the finite dimensions of the market. I'm quoting this from the book. And it has to be built on a relationship dimension. So not just in a market dimension, but a relationship dimension. And so how wonderful, because now we are really talking about moving from labor force, right, to human force. And so I'm going to go back to the idea of human force, because no one did it better than Gandhiji. And recently I wrote a piece for Vogue India, which was called The Khadi State of Mind. So khadi is this hand-spun, handmade fabric that became a symbol of empowerment, of social change, of political sovereignty, of economic sovereignty for India when it went through 200 years of British Raj, of colonization. And so the idea of me writing the story was not necessarily that everyone has to wear khadi, but because it was such a profound symbol, what does it mean to have a khadi state of mind? Khadi, a very humble hand-woven, hand-spun fabric that Gandhiji used as a symbol of freedom. So we all know about the riveting history, right? So I'm going to read a little bit that I wrote about this in the magazine. The khadi state of mind can teach us to lead a deliberate life, a life of creativity that, like the Sangam of the sacred rivers of Ganga, Jamuna, and the mythical Saraswati, there's a confluence of head, heart, and hands. To live a deliberate life is to be acutely aware of actions instead of acting automatically. It is to recognize the potential of everyday trade to change lives for the better. It is to upstage the bourgeois notions of creativity that still entrust ideas of beauty, aesthetics, acceptability as the domain of the Western world. When we, the ancient, the indigenous, have unparalleled narratives of age-old crafts. These are symbols of our shared culture and humanity, made possible by millions of people who have been invisible for a long time. And now we need to make them visible. If Gandhi was alive today, he would have been very much into the millennials and the Gen Zs walking on the streets. By the way, Gandhi influenced everyone from Dr. Martin Luther King's protests to present day Extinction Rebellion. It is this khadi state of mind where people are in the civil disobedience that happened, an act of protest and being activist from within. We see it everywhere today. And you can see that the genesis of it all comes from the most humbling ethos and ethics of Gandhiji. And so this is, for me, asking you, it is like a little beacon, a foghorn telling you that you need to be an activist. You need to be a craftivist. And you need to show us the way. So here is a Gandhian call. It is a Gandhian call for Sarvodaya. It is a Gandhian call for the welfare for all. It is a Gandhian call for eco-consciousness and an economy and creativity of kindness. As Gandhi said, there is no beauty in the finest cloth if it makes hunger and unhappiness. So we need to create with eco-consciousness. Thank you very much.